June 18, 2017 was supposed to become one of the happiest memories in the Hale family's life. Instead, it became the date that destroyed everything Meredith Hale believed was stable, safe, and permanent. 7 years later, people in Orlando still remembered the headlines. American father and daughter vanish during Caribbean cruise stop. At first, the story spread across local television stations because it sounded impossible. A husband and teenage daughter disappearing in the middle of a crowded tourist district in Puerto Rico made no sense. There were cameras everywhere, cruise passengers everywhere, police patrols everywhere. Families took vacations there every single day without problems. Yet Nolan and Tessa Hale vanished within less than an hour, leaving behind no ransom demands, no confirmed sightings, and no explanation anyone could fully believe. By the summer of 2024, most people had stopped talking about it. Meredith never did. At 49 years old, Meredith still lived in the same house outside Orlando where the three of them had lived before the cruise. The neighbors had changed over the years. Families moved away. New couples arrived. Children grew older. Seasons passed. But inside Meredith's house, time had stayed trapped in 2017. Tessa's graduation photo still sat on the hallway table. Nolan's work jacket still hung in the laundry room. Boxes filled with missing person flyers occupied nearly half the dining room. FBI reports, newspaper articles, Puerto Rico police statements, and printed screenshots from online tips covered almost every shelf in the house. 7 years of searching had turned Meredith into someone unrecognizable from the woman she used to be. Before the disappearance, she worked full-time managing patient records at a private hospital network in Orlando. Co-workers described her as organized, calm, dependable. She used to host Sunday dinners. She remembered birthdays. She planned vacations months in advance. After June 2017, none of those things mattered anymore. Her entire life became centered around one question. What happened to Nolan and Tessa? That morning in August 2024, Special Agent Raymond Vance from the FBI arrived at her house shortly after 9. Meredith already knew the visit was bad news before he said a single word. Federal agents did not make personal visits after 7 years unless something important had changed, or unless they were preparing to stop trying. Raymond had been assigned to the case almost from the beginning. He looked older now. So did Meredith. Time had not been kind to either of them. The official explanation was simple. Resources had shifted. New cases demanded attention. There had been no verified lead in nearly 3 years. Interpol had downgraded the case months earlier. Puerto Rican authorities had no active evidence left to investigate. The FBI would still keep the file open, but active investigation hours were being reduced. Raymond tried to present the decision carefully, but Meredith understood exactly what it meant. The government was slowly accepting that Nolan and Tessa were probably never coming back. Meredith refused to accept that reality. For 7 years she had lived through false sightings, cruel prank calls, internet conspiracy theories, and endless emotional collapses that always ended the same way: disappointment. One tip placed Tessa in Las Vegas. Another claimed Nolan had crossed into Mexico under a fake identity. A woman from Arizona once insisted she had seen both of them working at a marina near Tucson. Every lead died eventually. Still, Meredith continued printing flyers and uploading age-progressed images online because stopping felt worse than suffering. Stopping meant surrender. After Raymond left, the silence inside the house became unbearable. Meredith prepared another stack of posters for a drive to Daytona Beach, where she still replaced old missing flyers every few months. Most people ignored them now. Some posters were covered by advertisements for roofing companies and local political campaigns. Others had faded from years of Florida heat and rain. But Meredith replaced them anyway. That routine was the only thing keeping her moving. The drive never happened. As she prepared to leave, her phone rang with an unfamiliar international number. Normally she ignored unknown calls immediately. Too many scammers had learned about the case over the years. Something made her answer this one. The woman on the line introduced herself as Celia Brooks. Celia explained that she worked with a non-profit organization supporting immigrant women in the Netherlands. She had previously lived in Florida for several years while working with community outreach programs near Tampa and Orlando. During that time, she had seen Tessa Hale's missing person posters everywhere. Last week, while in Rotterdam for a conference, Celia believed she had seen Tessa. Not someone similar. Not someone who vaguely resembled her. Tessa. The name hit Meredith like a shock she had spent years trying to prepare herself for. Celia described a blonde woman in her mid-20s near Rotterdam's Old Port district. The woman appeared withdrawn, heavily controlled by the man accompanying her, and avoided speaking directly to anyone nearby. According to Celia, the resemblance became impossible to ignore once she remembered the old missing person reports from Florida. The man with her spoke Russian accented English and appeared significantly older. Meredith listened carefully, forcing herself not to collapse emotionally the way she had during earlier false leads. Experience had taught her caution. Hope could become dangerous very quickly. Then Celia said something different. Before contacting Meredith, she had already filed a formal report with Rotterdam police. That single detail changed everything. Most scammers wanted money first. Most attention seekers wanted emotional reactions. Celia wanted law enforcement involved immediately. Within the hour, the FBI field office in Orlando received confirmation that Dutch authorities had officially submitted a possible sighting connected to the Hale disappearance case. For the first time in years, Meredith felt something she barely recognized anymore. Not happiness, not relief, momentum, and somewhere deep inside her, beneath 7 years of exhaustion and grief, a terrifying possibility began taking shape. What if Tessa had actually survived? Meredith spent the rest of that afternoon inside a state of emotional suspension she had not experienced in years. Every instinct warned her to stay cautious. Every memory from the past 7 years reminded her how easily hope could become humiliation. Yet the information coming from Rotterdam felt too organized, too official, too real to dismiss. Within 2 hours, Raymond Vance called again from the FBI field office. Dutch authorities had confirmed receiving a statement from Celia Brooks earlier that morning. Rotterdam police had forwarded the possible sighting through Interpol channels because the Hale case was still flagged internationally despite its reduced priority status. For the first time in years, Meredith heard something different in Raymond's voice. Uncertainty, not optimism. Federal agents avoided optimism after cases like this. But there was enough credibility behind the report that the FBI could not ignore it. Raymond explained that Dutch police planned to review surveillance footage from the district where the sighting occurred. They would also coordinate with anti-trafficking investigators already operating near Rotterdam's port areas. The problem was time. If the woman truly was Tessa, whoever controlled her could move her again within hours. That possibility refused to leave Meredith's mind. For years, she had imagined hundreds of scenarios. Maybe Tessa had died in Puerto Rico. Maybe she had been trafficked. Maybe Nolan had tried to protect her and failed. Maybe both of them had been killed the same night they disappeared. The uncertainty had tortured Meredith far more than grief alone ever could. At least grief gave people closure. Uncertainty destroyed people slowly. After ending the call with Raymond, Meredith sat alone at her kitchen table surrounded by unopened mail, stacks of printed flyers, and old FBI paperwork. Her attention drifted toward a framed family photo taken 3 days before the cruise in 2017. Nolan had booked the vacation almost a year earlier. He wanted one final trip before Tessa left for college in Atlanta that fall. Meredith still remembered how proud he sounded whenever he talked about their daughter getting accepted into Georgia State University. Tessa had wanted to study journalism. Back then, the future still existed. Now Meredith measured time differently. Not by birthdays or holidays, but by years since the disappearance. 7 years. 7 years of waking up every morning wondering whether her daughter was alive. Her phone rang again just before evening. Celia. This time the woman sounded more serious than before. Rotterdam police had contacted her directly for additional details. Investigators apparently recognized the district she described as an active location connected to ongoing trafficking investigations involving Eastern European criminal networks. Celia also admitted something she had hesitated to mention earlier. The woman she believed was Tessa had not looked safe. According to Celia, the woman avoided eye contact with everyone around her and remained unusually quiet. The man beside her monitored every interaction closely. Nothing about the situation felt voluntary. Meredith listened in silence. The possibility she had spent years fearing most was suddenly becoming real. Human trafficking. The phrase itself felt impossible attached to her daughter's name, even after all this time. Meredith had watched documentaries, read FBI reports, and followed missing persons forums long enough to know how these networks operated around tourist ports and international cruise routes. Young women disappeared every year. Most never returned. The realization created a different kind of horror inside her. If Tessa truly survived all these years, what kind of life had she been forced into? By nightfall, Meredith already knew she could not stay in Florida waiting for updates from strangers overseas. Raymond disagreed immediately. During their second phone call that evening, he urged patience and caution. He reminded Meredith about the disaster in Arizona 4 years earlier, when a false lead nearly emptied her savings and left her emotionally shattered for months afterward. He stressed that Dutch police were capable professionals. Traveling internationally based on a single sighting could interfere with the investigation or even place her in danger. Meredith understood every argument. None of them mattered anymore. The moment Celia described the woman in Rotterdam, something inside Meredith changed. It was not logic. It was not evidence. It was instinct. A mother's instinct. By 9 o'clock that night, Meredith had already searched every available flight from Orlando to Amsterdam. The fastest departure left the following afternoon. She booked it before giving herself enough time to reconsider. Only after the confirmation email arrived did the reality of her decision begin settling in. She was about to cross the Atlantic Ocean based entirely on a possible sighting from a stranger she had never met. From the outside, it sounded irrational. But nothing about the past 7 years had been rational. Before midnight, Meredith called Celia again and informed her about the flight details. Celia did not hesitate. She promised to meet Meredith personally at Schiphol Airport and help however she could once she arrived in the Netherlands. That reassurance mattered more than Meredith expected. Over the years, most people around her had slowly moved on from the case. Friends stopped asking questions because they no longer knew what to say. Co-workers avoided mentioning Nolan or Tessa altogether. Even relatives had quietly begun speaking about them in past tense. Only Meredith refused to let them disappear completely. For the first time in years, someone else seemed equally determined to keep searching. The next morning passed in a blur of preparation. Meredith packed lightly because she had no idea how long she would remain overseas. Important documents, medication, printed photographs of Tessa, copies of FBI reports, chargers, passport, cash. Every item felt disconnected from reality, like she was preparing for someone else's life instead of her own. Before leaving for the airport, Meredith paused inside Tessa's old bedroom. Very little had changed there since 2017. The shelves still held old journalism magazines and college brochures from Atlanta. A faded concert ticket remained pinned near the desk. Meredith had preserved the room for years, partly out of grief and partly out of fear. Changing anything felt too close to accepting permanent loss. Now, for the first time, the room felt different. Not frozen. Waiting. The drive toward Orlando International Airport felt longer than usual. Meredith kept replaying the same questions repeatedly. If Tessa was alive, why had she never contacted anyone? Did she even know people were still searching for her? And what really happened to Nolan? That final question stayed with Meredith more than anything else. Because deep down, despite everything, part of her still feared the answer. By the time Meredith arrived at Orlando International Airport, the decision no longer felt impulsive. Felt overdue. For 7 years, every official update had come through emails, phone calls, case numbers, and carefully worded statements. She had waited because law enforcement told her to wait. She had trusted procedures because she had no other choice. She had accepted delays, jurisdictional complications, and international coordination problems because everyone kept telling her these cases took time. But time had already taken almost everything from her. The flight to Amsterdam was scheduled for the following afternoon, with a connection through Atlanta. Meredith arrived earlier than necessary, carrying one small suitcase and a folder thick with documents she had carried to police stations too many times to count. Inside were printed photographs of Tessa at 18, age-progressed images created by a volunteer forensic artist, copies of Nolan's passport, FBI case summaries, and contact information for Raymond Vance. She had also printed Celia Brooks's name, phone number, and the address of the nonprofit organization where Celia worked. After being deceived before, Meredith no longer allowed emotion to erase caution. She wanted to believe Celia. More than anything, she wanted to believe her. But belief had hurt her before. At the airline counter, the agent asked whether Amsterdam was her final destination. Meredith almost answered yes, then corrected herself. Rotterdam was where she needed to go. Amsterdam was only the doorway. During the first leg to Atlanta, Meredith checked her phone repeatedly, hoping for an update from Raymond. Nothing came. By the time she boarded the transatlantic flight, her thoughts had separated into two competing voices. One voice sounded like the FBI. It reminded her that witnesses could be mistaken. People saw familiar faces everywhere when they expected to. Lighting, memory, emotion, and distance could twist reality. Tessa had been 18 when she disappeared. A woman in her mid-20s could resemble her without being her. The other voice belonged only to Meredith. That voice kept returning to one fact. Celia had gone to the police before asking Meredith for anything. No money, no attention, no dramatic promises. Just a report, filed through the proper channels, serious enough for Dutch authorities to pass to Interpol and serious enough for the FBI to call Meredith twice in one day. That was not nothing. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Meredith reviewed the original timeline from June 18, 2017 again, as if a hidden answer might appear after the 1000th reading. Family leaves cruise ship in San Juan. Lunch near Old Port. Tessa walks alone toward shopping area. Nolan leaves to look for Tessa. Both fail to return. Security notified. Cruise ship departure delayed. Puerto Rico police report filed. No confirmed video recovery. No verified witnesses. No ransom communication. No use of credit cards, bank accounts, passports, or cell phones after disappearance. Every line remained sterile. Official language had stripped all pain from the event. The reports made Nolan and Tessa sound like entries in a database. Not a husband who had packed extra sunscreen because Meredith always forgot it. Not a daughter who had been excited about college and terrified of leaving home. Meredith had spent years wondering whether the investigation failed because the crime happened too quickly. A cruise stop created confusion by nature. People moved in and out constantly. Tourists looked alike to strangers. Local police had too little time. Ship security had too little authority. By the time everyone understood something terrible had happened, the trail was already fractured across jurisdictions. The plane landed at Schiphol Airport the following evening. Meredith turned on her phone as soon as service returned. Several messages appeared at once. One from Raymond Vance, reminding her to contact him before speaking with Dutch police directly. One from her neighbor in Orlando confirming the house was secure. Two from Celia. The first message said she was already on her way. The second said traffic between Rotterdam and Amsterdam had delayed her, but she would still meet Meredith near arrivals. For 10 tense minutes, Meredith stood among travelers reuniting with families, business people checking schedules, and tourists searching for transportation. The normal rhythm of other people's lives felt almost unreal. Everyone around her had destinations, plans, and certainty. Meredith had none of those things. Then Celia Brooks called her name. The woman who approached looked exhausted but focused, the way people looked when they had been carrying responsibility longer than they intended. She was American, from Oregon originally, though she had lived in Europe for most of the past decade. Her work with immigrant women had taken her between Florida, Washington State, Belgium, and the Netherlands. That background was part of why Tessa's face had stayed with her. In Orlando, The Hale case had become impossible to miss during the first year after the disappearance. Posters at gas stations, local news segments, social media shares from law enforcement pages, community fundraisers. Celia said she had never met Meredith, but she had known the story. Everyone who worked in outreach circles in Central Florida knew it. That fact brought Meredith a strange kind of comfort. Tessa had not disappeared from everyone's memory. Somewhere, even among strangers, her daughter's face had remained alive. Celia had rented a gray SUV because she expected they might need to move quickly between Rotterdam, the police station, and wherever investigators asked them to go. She had already spoken with a contact at the local station and confirmed that Dutch police were treating the sighting seriously, though not yet as confirmation. The drive to Rotterdam took less than an hour, but for Meredith it felt like entering the final stretch of a race she had been running for 7 years without knowing where the finish line was. Celia explained the sighting again in greater detail. It happened near Rotterdam's Old Port District, close to several clubs that drew both tourists and shipping workers. Celia had been leaving a meeting connected to her nonprofit when she noticed a young woman outside a private bar. At first, the resemblance seemed like coincidence. Then the woman turned slightly, and Celia recognized the eyes from the missing posters in Orlando. The woman was using the name Savannah. At least, that was the name someone nearby used when addressing her. She spoke little. When she did speak, Celia heard American English beneath a strained, uneven voice. The man beside her corrected her sharply when she answered a question from another woman. He had a Russian accent, visible tattoos near his neck, and the kind of controlled authority Celia had seen before in men who managed frightened women while pretending nothing illegal was happening. Celia had not approached directly because she feared making the situation worse. Instead, she memorized every detail she could, left the area and reported it. Meredith listened without interrupting. Every detail added weight. Not certainty. Not yet. But wait. The name Savannah meant nothing to her. Tessa had never known anyone by that name, never used it online, never mentioned liking it. The thought of her daughter being forced to live under another identity created a cold, concentrated anger Meredith had never felt before. Celia had booked a small hotel room in Rotterdam under Meredith's name, close enough to the district for convenience but not so close that it would attract attention. She suggested checking in first, contacting the police again, and letting them decide the safest next step. Meredith knew that was reasonable. She also knew she could not spend the night in a hotel room waiting. Not after crossing the ocean. Not after hearing that the woman might be moved again. Not after 7 years of being told to wait. Celia did not argue for long. She understood what this moment meant. She only insisted that they stay together and notify the police before asking questions in the district. Meredith agreed, though patience no longer felt possible. Rotterdam was no longer just a foreign city on the other side of the world. It had become the place where the impossible might finally become real. Somewhere nearby, a woman named Savannah might be living with Tessa Hale's face, Tessa Hale's age, and Tessa Hale's stolen past. And Meredith had not come all this way to sleep before finding out the truth. By the time Meredith and Celia reached the Old Port District, it was past midnight, but the urgency inside Meredith made the hour feel irrelevant. In Orlando, this would have been the time when neighbors turned off porch lights, police cruisers moved through quiet subdivisions, and late-night diners served coffee to nurses, truck drivers, and people who could not sleep. Here, everything carried a different rhythm. Meredith did not understand the language around her, did not know the streets, did not know which doors were safe and which were not. But somewhere inside this city, a woman using the name Savannah might be her daughter. That single possibility overpowered everything else. Celia had warned her during the drive that the area near the port could become complicated quickly. Rotterdam was not lawless, but like many major port cities, certain neighborhoods operated in layers most visitors never understood. There were licensed businesses, private clubs, backroom arrangements, migrant workers passing through, women with uncertain legal status, and men who knew exactly how to exploit confusion between jurisdictions. Celia had seen enough through her nonprofit work to know that desperation often hid in ordinary places. Meredith listened, but every word circled back to Tessa. If Tessa had been trapped in a place like this, then every day Meredith spent printing flyers in Florida had happened while her daughter was living under another name thousands of miles away. The thought was too large to fully absorb. It made the 7 years feel both endless and brutally wasted. Celia suggested they go directly to the police station first. She had already contacted an officer connected to the trafficking unit, and she believed an in-person report from Meredith could help speed up the response. The station was not far, but getting there by the main streets would take longer. Celia knew a shorter route through the district near several adult clubs and private bars. Meredith agreed because waiting had become impossible. They moved quickly, staying close enough to avoid being separated. Celia handled every practical detail. Directions, messages to the police contact, reminders not to confront anyone alone. Meredith heard her, but her mind remained locked on the name Savannah. A false name, a manufactured name, a name that could have been printed on fake documents, whispered by handlers, repeated often enough until the real name underneath began to disappear. Tessa Hale. Meredith repeated it silently like an anchor. Tessa Hale from Orlando, Florida. Tessa Hale, 18 years old when she vanished. Tessa Hale, accepted to college, loved investigative podcasts, wanted to become a journalist, hated being treated like a child, and had argued with Meredith the week before the cruise about whether she could dye the ends of her hair blue before graduation photos. Those memories were not proof, but they were stronger than any document in Meredith's folder. They were the details no trafficker could erase from a mother's mind. The shortcut took them behind a row of small establishments near the edge of the district. Celia's attention shifted from navigation to caution. She had gone quiet in a way that made Meredith understand the risk without needing an explanation. The places around them were not designed for strangers asking questions. People who worked there were used to looking away, and people who controlled those businesses did not welcome attention. Then Celia stopped. At first Meredith did not understand why. She had been focused on getting to the police station, on staying calm long enough to give another official statement, on making sure the Dutch authorities took her seriously. Celia said her name once, low and tense. Meredith turned toward the direction Celia indicated. Behind a pane of glass in a private room was a young woman with blonde hair. For one suspended second, Meredith's mind rejected what her eyes were trying to tell her. 7 years had changed the face. The girl from the graduation photo was gone, replaced by a woman who looked older than 25 in ways that had nothing to do with age. There was a distance in her expression that Meredith had seen before in survivors at hospital intake desks, in women who spoke carefully because life had taught them that every word could carry consequences. But the shape of the face was there. The eyes were there. Even through the damage, the resemblance was not vague. It was not a stranger who looked slightly familiar. It was the kind of recognition that bypassed reason and went straight into the deepest part of Meredith's grief. It was Tessa. Meredith could not make sense of the glass, the unfamiliar room, the name Savannah, or the fact that her daughter did not react with recognition. All she knew was that after 7 years of searching through paper, databases, reports, and dead-end tips, the face she had been chasing was suddenly close enough to reach, but still separated from her by something invisible and cruel. Celia said she was sure. This was the same woman she had seen before. The same hair, the same face, the same guarded emptiness. The confirmation only intensified the panic. Meredith tried to get the woman's attention. The young woman looked toward them, but there was no instant recognition, no relief, no sign that the name Tessa had reached her. Instead, confusion appeared first, then alarm. That reaction nearly broke Meredith. She had imagined a reunion thousands of times. In every version, Tessa knew her. In every version, the moment carried certainty. This was different. This was a young woman who might have survived so much that even her own mother had become part of a life she no longer trusted. Celia warned Meredith to stay careful, but the warning came too late. The woman behind the glass disappeared from sight. Within moments, a security employee came out from the club entrance. He was large, controlled, and completely uninterested in Meredith's explanation. His message was direct. They needed to leave. This was private property. They were disturbing workers and customers. If they did not go, he would call the police. That threat meant nothing to Meredith. She told him the woman inside was her missing daughter. She said the name Tessa Hale, said Orlando, said FBI, said 7 years. The words came out in fragments because the situation was moving too fast. The security employee dismissed every part of it. According to him, the woman was not Tessa. Her name was Savannah. She was there legally. Meredith had made a mistake. Celia immediately switched into crisis mode. She contacted Rotterdam police again, this time with their exact location and an urgent update. The possible missing American woman had been located inside a club near the Port District, and staff were refusing access. Meredith remained fixed on the door the young woman had vanished behind. Every second felt dangerous. If this was truly Tessa, then the people controlling her might move her before police arrived. If it was not Tessa, then Meredith was about to suffer another public collapse in a foreign country, in front of a woman who had risked her own safety trying to help. But the longer the security employee tried to force them away, the more convinced Meredith became. An innocent business would have asked questions. An innocent employee would have looked at the photo. An innocent situation would not feel like a door closing on the only hope she had left. Celia continued speaking to the police, her tone controlled but urgent. She repeated Meredith's name, Tessa's name, the FBI case, and the location. She made clear that the woman inside could be a long-term missing American citizen connected to an international trafficking investigation. The security employee's attitude shifted only slightly, but enough for Meredith to notice. His confidence became irritation. His irritation became pressure. He insisted again that they leave before causing trouble. Meredith did not move away. For 7 years, she had been told to wait, to be patient, to trust systems that always arrive too late. This time, she was standing within reach of the truth, and no guard, no false name, no private door in Rotterdam was going to make her walk away. Celia ended the call and said the police were coming. The minutes that followed felt longer than the entire flight from Florida. Meredith kept thinking of the last day in San Juan. Tessa walking away for a short errand, Nolan leaving to find her, both of them vanishing into a gap no one had ever been able to explain. Now, in Rotterdam, that gap had reopened. And behind it was a woman named Savannah who looked exactly like the daughter Meredith had never stopped searching for. The man who came out after the security employee did not look surprised to find trouble waiting outside. He looked annoyed, as if Meredith and Celia were not two women trying to identify a missing American citizen, but an inconvenience interrupting business. Celia recognized the shift immediately. This was no longer a misunderstanding with a security worker. This was someone with authority over the club, someone who expected the people around him to obey without explanation. He introduced himself only after Celia demanded a name. Victor Malenkov. The name meant nothing to Meredith at first. It was only another foreign name in a night already full of things she did not understand. But the way Celia reacted told her enough. Celia had worked with women who had escaped men like him. She knew the kind of calm that often came before threats. She knew the way traffickers disguised control as paperwork, contracts, private arrangements, and legal employment. Victor spoke in clipped English with a Russian accent. He insisted the woman inside was not Tessa Hale. According to him, her name was Savannah Reed. She was an adult. She had legal identification. She worked there by choice. Meredith had confused her with someone else because grief had made her desperate. Those words landed exactly where they were meant to land. For 7 years, Meredith had been forced to defend her sanity. Strangers online had called her obsessed. Comment sections had accused her of refusing reality. Even some people close to her had quietly suggested that continuing the search was damaging her life. Now this man was using the same cruelty in a different language. You are a grieving mother, you are confused, you are making a scene. But Meredith was no longer listening as a frightened tourist. She had heard every excuse that could be used to make a missing woman disappear twice. Celia told Victor that Dutch police were already on their way. She also informed him that the FBI case connected to Tessa Hale remained active in the United States and that Rotterdam police had already received a formal report earlier that day. That information changed the air between them. Victor's confidence did not vanish, but it cracked. He repeated that Savannah Reed had nothing to do with Florida, nothing to do with a cruise disappearance, and nothing to do with the FBI. He claimed Meredith was harassing an employee and disturbing customers. He warned that false accusations could create legal problems for both women. Celia refused to back down. She kept her voice steady and repeated that the police would decide. Then the sirens became audible. At that moment, every lie Victor had built began to collapse. The change in him was immediate. Meredith saw it before Celia did. Not fear exactly, but calculation. He no longer seemed interested in convincing them. He became focused on removing the one person who could expose the truth. Savannah, Tessa. Whoever she was legally, whoever she had been forced to become, Victor needed her gone before the police reached the door. The next moments unfolded too quickly for Meredith to fully process. Victor returned inside the club. The security employee tried to block Celia's view while repeating that the situation was under control. Celia immediately relayed the change to the emergency dispatcher, warning that the man connected to the possible victim was attempting to move her. Meredith could no longer see the woman from the glass room. That absence terrified her more than anything Victor had said. For 7 years, missing had meant unanswered calls, blank security footage, closed case updates, and posters fading under Florida sunlight. Now missing meant something immediate. A door, a false name, a man who knew the police were coming. The first police unit arrived within minutes, followed by another. Officers approached with the speed and seriousness of people who already understood the risk. Celia spoke Dutch rapidly, identifying Meredith, explaining the FBI connection, and pointing toward the rear access where Victor had disappeared with the woman. Meredith caught only fragments, but she understood the urgency. Officers moved to intercept Victor before he could leave the back of the building. The confrontation ended quickly. Victor attempted to dismiss the situation, repeating that Savannah was his employee and that the American woman outside was unstable. But once officers requested identification from both him and the woman, his story began falling apart. He could produce documents for himself. He could produce documents for Savannah. But he could not explain why the woman appeared heavily impaired. He could not explain why she seemed terrified to speak without looking toward him first. He could not explain why the documents connected to her showed inconsistencies that immediately caught the attention of the officers. When police searched Victor, the situation became far more serious. They found a stun device, multiple small packets of controlled substances, several prepaid phones, and identification cards bearing different names and photographs. Some documents appeared professionally forged. Others looked like temporary papers used to move women through clubs and private addresses without triggering standard employment checks. One officer separated Meredith and Celia from the club entrance while the others detained Victor. Celia translated what she could as the situation developed. Victor Malenkov was not just a club manager. His surname was already familiar to a trafficking task force monitoring Eastern European criminal networks operating between port cities. Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, and several Caribbean transit points had appeared in related intelligence reports. Police had not yet connected Victor directly to the larger network, but his name now mattered. The suspected network had been moving vulnerable women through cruise destinations, private clubs, and illegal escort operations for years. Meredith heard those words and felt the final pieces of her old life break apart. Cruise destinations, private clubs, illegal escort operations. It was no longer a vague possibility buried in an FBI report. It was not a worst-case scenario imagined during sleepless nights in Orlando. It was standing in front of her with police cars, forged documents, and the young woman who might be her daughter unable to clearly say her own name. The officers brought the woman out separately from Victor. Meredith tried to say Tessa's name, but Celia quietly warned her not to overwhelm her. The woman looked disoriented, frightened, and disconnected from the situation around her. Her responses to the officers came slowly. Sometimes she answered to Savannah. Sometimes she did not answer at all. Meredith noticed marks on her that looked old and poorly healed. She noticed the exhausted confusion of someone who had not been allowed to exist freely for a long time. More than anything, she noticed the absence of recognition. If this woman was Tessa, then 7 years had done something far worse than separate a daughter from her mother. They had buried her under fear, chemicals, false names, and survival. A police medic assessed her briefly before recommending immediate medical evaluation. The officers agreed that formal questioning could not happen until she was stable. The woman appeared to be under the influence of drugs or sedatives, and any statement taken in that condition would be unreliable and potentially harmful. Meredith wanted answers instantly. She wanted someone to confirm the truth right there on the street. She wanted the woman to say her name was Tessa Hale, that she remembered Orlando, that she remembered Nolan, that she remembered Meredith. But the reality in front of her was not that clean. It was damaged, complicated, and terrifyingly fragile. Celia stayed close enough to help translate updates from the officers. Victor was being taken into custody. The woman would be transported to a medical facility connected with Rotterdam police. Her identification would be checked through official systems. If there was any connection to the missing American case, Dutch authorities would notify the FBI immediately. Meredith knew she should feel relief. Instead, she felt a deeper fear than before. Because if this woman truly was Tessa, then Meredith had not found her at the end of the nightmare. She had found her in the middle of one. For nearly 3 hours, Meredith existed in the narrow space between confirmation and fear. The Rotterdam police clinic was connected to the station through a victim support protocol Meredith had never known existed until that night. Everything moved with a controlled seriousness that reminded her of hospital intake back in Orlando, except here she was the one being managed carefully, gently, firmly. Officers did not leave her alone, but they did not give her the one thing she needed most either. They could not confirm the woman was Tessa until the records were checked. They could not let Meredith speak to her until medical staff cleared it. They could not allow emotion to overtake procedure. Meredith understood the reasons. She had worked around hospital records long enough to know that identification mattered, documentation mattered, chain of evidence mattered. If this was truly connected to trafficking, one mistake could weaken a case against people who had spent years hiding behind false names and forged papers. But knowing that did not make waiting easier. Celia remained beside her the entire time, translating whenever officers spoke too quickly in Dutch, repeating updates in a way Meredith could understand. The woman had been admitted under the name on her documents. Savannah Reed. That name appeared on an identification card found among Victor Malenkov's belongings, along with employment paperwork tied to the club. At first glance, the documents looked convincing enough to pass a casual inspection. But investigators noticed inconsistencies almost immediately. The birth year matched Tessa's. The photo matched the woman from the club. The accent raised questions. The medical state raised more. Then the records unit began digging deeper. Meredith had spent 7 years begging for one clear answer. Now the answer seemed to be approaching through a system of database searches, foreign language calls, scanned documents, and cross-border notifications. It felt cruel that the truth about her own daughter had to travel through so many official channels before anyone could say it aloud. A female officer from the trafficking unit eventually entered the waiting area with Celia's police contact. Celia listened first, her face changing before she translated. Meredith knew before the words came. The documents linked to Savannah Reed were fraudulent. A prior identity file had been found under the name Tessa Hale, born in Orlando, Florida. The change appeared to have been created through a chain of forged residency papers and manipulated records that Dutch police believed had been used to conceal women moved through trafficking networks. Meredith heard the name, Tessa Hale. For 7 years, that name had lived on flyers, FBI forms, online search pages, and missing person databases. Now it had returned from the mouth of a police officer in Rotterdam. Tessa was alive. The confirmation did not feel like joy at first. It felt like impact. Everything inside Meredith went silent for a moment, as if her mind could not accept the size of what had just been said. The girl who had vanished from San Juan in 2017 had not become a memory. She had survived. She had survived, but not safely. That truth arrived immediately after the first. Medical staff reported that Tessa was regaining consciousness, though she remained disoriented. Toxicology screening indicated recent drug exposure, likely used to keep her compliant or dependent. She was dehydrated, exhausted, and emotionally unstable. The clinic staff recommended that any reunion be handled carefully, with police and medical professionals present. Meredith wanted to go to her immediately. The officers asked her to wait. The word wait had haunted her for 7 years. Wait for search updates. Wait for lab results. Wait for foreign police. Wait for the FBI. Wait for Interpol. Wait for closure. Now, with her daughter alive in the next room, Meredith was told to wait again. But this time, waiting had a different shape. It was no longer the empty waiting of not knowing. It was the careful waiting required because Tessa had been harmed so deeply that even love had to approach gently. When the door finally opened, Meredith saw her daughter for the first time without glass between them. 7 years had changed Tessa in ways no age progression image could have predicted. She was 25 now, not the 18-year-old who had left for a short walk during a cruise stop. Her face held the exhaustion of someone who had spent too long surviving other people's control. The bright future Meredith had once imagined for her daughter had been replaced by something fragile and uncertain. Tessa did not recognize her immediately. That delay hurt more than Meredith expected. The young woman looked first at the officers, then at Celia, then at Meredith with confusion that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside fear. She asked whether she was in trouble. She asked if the police were arresting her because of the drugs. She asked where Victor was. The name Victor created a visible shift among the officers. One of them explained calmly that Victor Malenkov had been arrested on suspicion of human trafficking, exploitation, possession of illegal weapons, and involvement in a larger criminal network. He would not be allowed near her. Tessa absorbed the information slowly, as if safety itself was difficult to believe. Meredith said her name softly. Not Savannah. Tessa. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the sound of that name seemed to reach a place the false identity had not fully destroyed. Tessa looked at Meredith again, longer this time. Recognition emerged slowly, painfully, as if memory had to fight through years of drugs, fear, and commands not to remember. Mom. The word broke something open in Meredith that grief had sealed for 7 years. The reunion was not the way she had imagined it in the thousands of nights when sleep refused to come. There was no simple relief, no clean ending, no instant return to what had been lost. Tessa was alive, but she was also terrified. She was free, but only in the first minutes of freedom. She recognized Meredith, but the recognition came wrapped in shock and confusion. Still, it was real. Meredith told her she had never stopped searching. She told her the posters never came down for long. She told her Orlando never forgot completely. She told her the FBI files stayed open. She told her that no matter what name they had forced on her, she had always been Tessa Hale. Tessa cried without fully understanding what to believe. She said she had thought everyone gave up. She said she thought no one knew where she was. She said there were long stretches when she could barely remember her own life before. The officers allowed only a short moment before the process had to continue. Tessa needed to be taken to the station for a formal protective interview once the medical team cleared her. Meredith would be allowed to remain nearby, but investigators needed to document everything carefully. At the station, Tessa was placed in an interview room designed for victims, not suspects. A trauma specialist was called. A female officer led the questioning. Celia stayed available for Meredith, though the interview itself took place in English because Tessa's American accent became clearer as she grew more alert. At first, Tessa's memory came in fragments. San Juan, the shopping area near the port, a man asking for directions, a van, panic, then Nolan. At the mention of her father, Tessa's composure broke in a way that made the room feel smaller. Meredith had waited 7 years to know what happened to her husband, but now that the answer was coming, part of her wanted to stop time before the truth arrived. Tessa remembered being forced into a delivery van near the cruise port. She remembered Nolan finding them, He had seen enough to understand she was in danger and followed the vehicle toward an industrial area outside the tourist district. He reached the warehouse where they had taken her. He tried to get her out, but there were too many of them. Tessa said 6 men overpowered him. They restrained him. They used him as a warning. For several days, Nolan remained alive because he refused to stop fighting for her. He kept trying to protect her, kept trying to draw attention away from her, kept demanding they let his daughter go. Tessa remembered being drugged repeatedly, remembered waking in pieces, remembered hearing Nolan's voice until she no longer did. The final part came quietly. Nolan was killed in a cargo hold before the group moved her out of Puerto Rico. Meredith had imagined death before. She had imagined it because not imagining it had become impossible. But hearing it from Tessa transformed speculation into reality. Nolan had not abandoned them. He had not taken Tessa. He had not vanished willingly. He had died trying to save their daughter. For years, Meredith had carried unanswered suspicion because investigators had to consider every possibility. At different points, even she had wondered whether Nolan knew something, whether there had been another life, another reason, another secret. Now shame joined grief. Tessa kept speaking, though the officers repeatedly reminded her she could pause. Once the story began, it seemed she needed to release it before fear closed over it again. After San Juan, she was moved through a network that changed locations often. The first transport happened by cargo vessel. She was kept with other women, some younger than her, some older, all frightened, all stripped of documents and names. Her passport was taken. Her phone disappeared. Her identity became something the men controlled. At some point, Tessa Hale became Savannah Reed. Not in one moment, but through repetition. New name, new papers, new rules, new punishments for remembering. Meredith listened because there was nothing else she could do. Every sentence confirmed that her daughter had spent 7 years inside a system designed to erase her. Every detail proved why there had been no calls, no bank activity, no passport scan, no ordinary trace for investigators to follow. Tessa had not disappeared because the world was too large. She had disappeared because people had deliberately turned her into someone else. The interview did not become easier after the truth about Nolan was spoken. If anything, it became harder, because the question Meredith had carried for 7 years had finally split into dozens of other questions, each one more painful than the last. Tessa had survived. Nolan had not. And between those two facts was a 7-year span no mother could fully prepare herself to hear. The officers let the silence settle for a while before asking Tessa to continue only if she felt able. The trauma specialist reminded everyone that this was not a criminal interrogation of her. She was not responsible for what had been done to her. She did not have to remember everything perfectly. Broken memory was common in long-term exploitation cases, especially when drugs, fear, and forced isolation were involved. Tessa seemed to understand the words, but understanding and believing were not the same thing. For years, blame had been part of the cage they built around her. She explained that, after Puerto Rico, the first days and weeks blurred together. She remembered containers, temporary rooms, men speaking in languages she did not understand, and women being moved in groups or separated without warning. At first, she kept asking about her father. She kept saying her real name. She kept telling them that her mother would find her and that the FBI would come. Those statements became dangerous. The men who controlled her punished every attempt to hold on to her old life. They told her no one was searching anymore. They told her cruise ship disappearances happened all the time. They told her her mother had accepted insurance money and moved on. They told her Nolan was dead because he had made trouble. They repeated those lies until hope became painful to keep alive. Tessa said the first year was the year they broke time. There were no normal days, no calendars, no birthdays, no holidays, no clear sense of where she was. She was moved through several locations before reaching Europe. At each stop, someone else took charge of her. Some used English. Some did not. Some pretended to be business managers. Others made no effort to hide what they were. Her documents were replaced gradually. At first, she was given a fake name only to answer to. Then came altered paperwork. Then came rehearsed personal details. Savannah Reed was not just a name on an ID. It became a script she had to perform. She was told she was from Ohio. She was told she had no family. She was told she had chosen to leave the United States. She was told that if she ever claimed otherwise, she would be arrested, deported, or sent back to men worse than the ones already controlling her. Meredith listened to every word with a kind of grief that had no place to go. This was not just abduction. It was erasure. Someone had taken her daughter's name, history, family, and future, then replaced them with a lie designed to survive police checks and casual questions. The first years in Europe were the worst. Tessa was forced into modeling jobs that were not really modeling jobs at all. The photographs became leverage. The men used them to shame her, threaten her, and convince her she could never return to her old life. From there, she was moved into private clubs, then into illegal escort arrangements connected to men who paid for access, silence, and control. The officers documented every detail carefully. Names, places, accents, tattoos, vehicles, phone numbers, apartment layouts, club names, hotel chains, border crossings, payment methods. Some details were clear. Others were fragmented. Tessa apologized whenever she could not remember something exactly, but the female officer repeatedly told her that fragments mattered. Even one detail could connect to another victim. One name could reopen another file. One location could identify a hidden part of the network. Viktor Malenkov appeared in her life later, not at the beginning. By then, Tessa had already spent years being conditioned to obey. Viktor did not need to use constant violence because the system before him had already taught her fear. He controlled access to drugs, documents, money, phones, transportation, and food. He decided which name she used. He decided who she spoke to. He decided when she could be seen and when she had to disappear. To the outside world, he presented himself as someone managing adult workers. In reality, he was guarding property. Tessa said the drugs became both a weapon and a trap. At first, they were used to keep her confused during transport. Later, they became part of daily control. If she resisted, they withheld them until withdrawal made resistance impossible. If she became too emotional, they gave her more until memory softened and time slipped away. Years passed in pieces because the people around her understood that a woman who could not fully remember yesterday was less likely to plan tomorrow. Meredith learned that this was why Tessa had never contacted her. Not because she stopped loving her. Not because she forgot Orlando completely. Not because she chose Savannah over Tessa. She was watched, drugged, threatened, and convinced that any attempt to reach home would bring punishment not only to her, but to other women trapped with her. The other women became part of the investigation immediately. Tessa did not know all their real names, but she remembered street names, languages, scars, hometowns mentioned during moments of trust, and the faces of women who vanished from one location and never returned. Some had been taken from Eastern Europe, some from Latin America, some from the United States. Some were runaways, some were migrants, some had been tricked with fake job offers. Others had been abducted outright. The officers made clear that Tessa's testimony could help dismantle far more than one club in Rotterdam. The name Malenkov connected to an older figure investigators had been tracking for years. Sergei Malenkov, believed to coordinate routes between the Caribbean, Western Europe, and port cities where illegal businesses could hide among legitimate trade. Viktor was not the leader. He was one piece of a larger system. That realization shifted the room. This was no longer only the story of one missing American girl found alive after 7 years. It was part of something wider, something that had swallowed many people and survived because every victim was isolated, renamed, and made too afraid to be believed. Dutch police informed Meredith that the process ahead would be long. Tessa would need a DNA test to formally confirm her identity for American authorities, even though the recovered records already strongly supported it. The FBI would be notified through official channels. Immigration and Victim Protection Services would need to coordinate her status, because her current documents were fraudulent but created through coercion. She would not be treated as a criminal. That assurance mattered. For a long time, Tessa had believed police were another threat. The officers also explained that further interviews would be necessary, but not all at once. Long-term trafficking survivors often remembered more over time, once they were safe enough to let memory return. No one expected her to solve the entire case in one night. Meredith wanted to thank the officers, Celia, the clinic staff, everyone who had treated Tessa as a person instead of a problem. But gratitude felt too small for what was happening. Celia remained nearby through most of the process, quiet but steady. She had done what so many people had failed to do over 7 years. She had noticed, believed, and acted before the chance disappeared. Without her, Tessa might have been moved again. Without her, Meredith might still be in Orlando replacing faded posters and begging officials not to close the file. When Meredith finally spoke to Celia privately, the words came from the deepest part of 7 years of searching. Celia had not just provided a lead. She had opened a locked door. Celia rejected the idea that she had done something extraordinary. She said she only recognized a face and called the police. But Meredith knew better. Most people looked away from uncomfortable situations. Most people convinced themselves it was none of their business. Celia did not. That choice changed everything. By the end of the interview, Tessa was exhausted, and Meredith understood that the reunion she had dreamed about would not become simple happiness overnight. Her daughter had returned alive, but she had returned carrying years of terror, addiction, shame forced onto her by others, and memories that no one should have to survive. Still, something important had shifted. Tessa Hale was no longer a missing person poster. She was no longer a false name inside a trafficking network. She was no longer alone in a foreign country with people who controlled every part of her life. She was alive. She was believed. And for the first time since June 18, 2017, the truth was finally beginning to move faster than the lies. The first official confirmation reached Orlando before sunrise. Raymond Vance called Meredith while she was still inside the Rotterdam police station, sitting near a victim support office with a paper cup of coffee she had not touched. His voice carried the careful restraint of an agent who had spent years delivering bad news and did not know how to deliver this kind of news without sounding afraid of it. Dutch authorities had forwarded the identity records. The FBI had matched Tessa Hale's file. A formal DNA test would still be required for court, immigration, and prosecution purposes, but for the first time since June 18, 2017, the United States government no longer considered Tessa only a missing person. She was alive. Meredith had imagined that moment for 7 years. She had imagined screaming, collapsing, laughing, calling everyone she knew. But when confirmation finally came, she felt strangely quiet inside. The relief was real, but it did not erase the grief. It did not bring Nolan back. It did not undo the years Tessa had lost. It did not restore the young woman who once planned to study journalism in Atlanta and spend her freshman year pretending she did not miss home. The truth had arrived, but it had arrived carrying wounds. Over the next several days, the investigation expanded rapidly. Rotterdam police, Europol, and the FBI began connecting Victor Malenkov's documents and devices to locations across the Netherlands and Belgium. Search warrants were executed at private apartments, storage units, and offices tied to shell businesses. Several women were identified as possible trafficking victims. Some were moved into protective care. Others were still missing. Tessa's testimony became a key part of the case, but investigators protected her from being used too quickly or too harshly. She was not treated like evidence. She was treated like a survivor. That distinction mattered. For years, other people had decided what her body was worth, what name she should answer to, where she should go, when she should speak, and what version of her past she was allowed to remember. Now, for the first time in 7 years, professionals asked for her permission. They explained each step. They repeated that she could pause. They told her that being unable to remember everything did not make her unreliable. It made her human. Meredith stayed in the Netherlands. At first, she told herself it would be for 1 week. Then 1 week became 3. Then 3 became 2 months. Her employer in Orlando placed her on emergency leave. Neighbors checked the house. Old friends who had not known what to say for years began sending messages filled with shock, sorrow, and careful hope. The world outside wanted the story to become simple. Mother finds missing daughter alive after 7 years. Miracle reunion in Europe. American trafficking victim rescued. But inside the small rooms where recovery actually began, nothing was simple. Tessa struggled with withdrawal. Some mornings she knew exactly where she was. Other mornings she woke inside a fear so old it no longer needed a reason. She apologized constantly for things that were never her fault. She asked whether people in Orlando would hate her if they knew what had happened. She worried that Nolan's family would blame her for his death. She asked more than once whether Meredith still saw her as the same daughter. Meredith answered the same way every time. Tessa had never stopped being her daughter. Not in San Juan. Not on the ships. Not in the clubs. Not under the name Savannah. Not when she could not remember her own birthday. Not when other people tried to turn her life into something they could sell. No crime committed against her had the power to make her less worthy of love. That truth took time for Tessa to believe. The DNA results came back confirming what Meredith already knew. Tessa Hale, born in Orlando, Florida, missing since 2017, had been found alive in Rotterdam under a coerced false identity. The paperwork gave law enforcement what it needed. But for Meredith, the real proof had come much earlier, in the fragile moment when Tessa looked at her and said the word that no forged document could erase. Mom. Arrangements began for Tessa's legal status and eventual return to the United States, though doctors advised against moving too quickly. She needed treatment, stability, and control over her own choices. Meredith had spent years trying to bring her daughter home, but now she understood that home could not be forced either. After everything Tessa had survived, even love had to be patient. So Meredith stopped measuring recovery by dramatic milestones. A full night of sleep became a victory. A meal without fear became a victory. A memory shared voluntarily became a victory. A day without asking where Victor was became a victory. The investigation continued without turning Tessa into a public spectacle. Meredith refused interview requests from national television. She declined documentary producers, true crime podcasts, and reporters who wanted details too painful to package as entertainment. For 7 years, public attention had helped keep Tessa's face alive. But now Meredith understood that being found did not mean being available to the world. Tessa deserved privacy. She deserved time. She deserved a future that did not belong to the worst thing ever done to her. 3 months after the rescue, Meredith returned briefly to Orlando to prepare the house. She did not leave Tessa's room untouched this time. Not because she was erasing the past, but because she finally understood that the room had been preserved for an 18-year-old who no longer existed. Tessa was 25 now. She had survived a life no one should survive. If she came home, she needed a place made for who she was becoming, not only who she had been. Meredith kept the graduation photo. She kept Nolan's favorite framed picture of the 3 of them from before the cruise. She kept the old journalism magazines because Tessa asked her not to throw them away. But she cleared space for new things. That simple act felt like grief and hope living in the same room. Before leaving Orlando again, Meredith visited the memorial stone Nolan's family had placed after the 5th year of the disappearance. Back then, there had been no body, no proof, only a need for somewhere to put their sorrow. Now she could finally bring the truth to him. Nolan had not disappeared by choice. He had not abandoned his family. He had died trying to protect his daughter. That truth hurt, but it also restored something. For years, uncertainty had stolen even the right to mourn him clearly. Now Meredith could grieve him as he deserved to be grieved. Not as a mystery, not as a suspect, not as a missing man frozen in speculation, but as a father who fought until he could not fight anymore. When Meredith returned to Rotterdam, Tessa was still in treatment, still fragile, still carrying days when the past felt stronger than the present. But she was also beginning to speak about tomorrow. Not loudly, not with certainty, just small possibilities. A support group, a victim advocacy program, maybe Sunday school again, maybe not journalism at first, maybe something slower, something that allowed her to help other women without losing herself. Meredith did not push. She had spent 7 years chasing answers. Now she was learning a harder kind of love. Staying close without demanding healing on her own timeline. The final legal road would be long. Viktor Malenkov's arrest opened only one door in a much larger case. Sergei Malenkov and the wider network would take months, maybe years, to fully pursue. Some victims would be found. Some might not. Some evidence would hold. Some would disappear into the same shadows that had protected the network for so long. But Tessa was no longer inside those shadows. That mattered. One evening, while reviewing documents with the victim advocate, Meredith saw the old missing person poster again. Tessa at 18. Bright smile. College plans. Last seen in San Juan, Puerto Rico, June 18, 2017. Contact FBI with information. For years, that poster had been Meredith's weapon against despair. Now it looked like a doorway to another life. Not a life that could be recovered completely, but a life that had been fought for. A life that had survived because one mother refused to stop searching. One stranger refused to look away. And one wounded young woman still carried enough of herself inside to recognize love when it finally reached her. Meredith had once believed that a happy ending meant getting back everything she lost. Now she knew better. Some losses never return. Some wounds do not vanish because the right person comes home. Some truths arrive too late to save everyone. But hope does not always come as a perfect ending. Sometimes hope is a daughter learning to sleep without fear. Sometimes it is a mother packing away old flyers because the search is finally over. Sometimes it is the courage to speak the real name after the world tried to replace it with a lie. And sometimes, after years of darkness, hope is simply this. Someone is found, someone is believed, and someone begins again. Thank you sincerely for taking the time to listen to today's story. Your presence, your attention, and your compassion mean more than words can express. This was not only a story about loss, fear, and years of painful searching, but also a story about a mother's love, a stranger's courage, and the fragile light of hope that can survive even in the darkest places. The lesson we can take from this story is simple but deeply meaningful. Never look away when someone may need help, and never underestimate the power of persistence. Sometimes one person who notices, one person who cares enough to speak up, can change the course of another person's life forever. And sometimes, love does not give us quick answers, but it gives us the strength to keep going when the world tells us to stop. Life can be unpredictable and painful, but this story reminds us that kindness, courage, and faith still matter. Even after years of silence, truth can still come to light. Even after deep wounds, healing can still begin. If this story touched your heart, please support our channel in the simplest way. Give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel so you will not miss our next stories. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful, emotional, and human stories to more people. Thank you again for listening, and may this story stay with you as a reminder to never give up on hope.